I picked up my phone before my coffee had even finished cooling. My hand was steady, which surprised me, because something inside me had finally cracked open. A note from my son sat on the kitchen table. 7 years earlier, I had given him and his wife my house because they were struggling. I had moved into the small guest apartment attached to the back and told myself it was temporary. I had called it a bridge. They would get stable, save money, and move into a place of their own. Instead, the bridge became their destination, and the note told me, in the simplest possible words, that I was the problem. "Mom, stop depending on me. I have my own family now. You need to make your own plans." I read it 4 times. Then I called my attorney. There was another part of my history Daniel could not fully understand because he had not been there when it happened. When Robert died, people told me I was strong. They meant it as a compliment. For years, I hated that word. Strong meant everyone assumed I could handle one more thing. When the hospital called at midnight because a department had a staffing crisis, I handled it. When Daniel broke his arm at 16, I handled it. When my mother developed complications in her final years, I handled it. People saw capability and mistook it for endless capacity. I learned to smile when someone said, "You're so strong." What I wanted to say was, "I don't want to be strong tonight. I want somebody else to notice that I'm tired." But I rarely said it. Robert had been the one person who noticed without being asked. He knew when I was exhausted from the way I placed my keys on the counter. He knew when I was worried because I cleaned things that were already clean. He knew when I was angry because I became overly polite. After he died, I became an expert at hiding those signs from everyone, including myself. Daniel was 19 then. He was grieving too, and I did what I thought a good mother should do. I became the solid ground under his feet. I never told him how frightened I was. I never told him there were nights I sat in Robert's empty chair and wondered how a single person was supposed to raise a grown child while learning how to live after losing a husband. I simply kept moving. That became my identity. Keep moving, keep helping, keep the house running, keep the family together. And when Daniel called years later about the mortgage, that old identity answered before the rest of me had a chance. Looking back, I can see that I did love him. But I also loved being needed. Those are not the same thing. Being needed had given my grief somewhere to go. It had given my days structure. It had protected me from asking the harder question of what I wanted after decades of responsibility. So when Daniel and Rachel moved into my house, I told myself I was helping them. I was. But I was also giving myself a reason not to face my own emptiness. That truth is harder to admit than anything Daniel ever did. It means I cannot place every mistake at his feet. He accepted the arrangement. I created it. He became comfortable. I allowed the comfort to continue. He forgot where the boundary was. I kept erasing it. For years, I thought admitting my part would weaken my argument. Instead, it made me stronger. I could hold Daniel accountable without pretending I had been perfect. That became important later, because I did not want revenge. I wanted freedom without lies. I wanted to look at my son and say, "You hurt me," without saying, "You ruined everything." Those were different statements. The first was true, the second was not. My life had contained beautiful things alongside its mistakes. That mattered. I had loved Robert. I had raised Daniel. I had built a career I was proud of. I had friendships that survived decades. I had a garden that bloomed every spring even when I forgot to prune it properly. I had survived loss. I had survived loneliness. I had survived the version of myself who thought surviving was the same thing as living. The note did not destroy that life. It simply forced me to stop pretending it was enough. There were evenings when Daniel was still a little boy that came back to me in flashes. His wet hair after a bath, his shoes kicked beneath the kitchen table, the way he used to crawl into my bed after thunderstorms and insist he was only there because he wanted to check on me. Those memories were not chains. They were gifts. I had confused holding them close with holding him close. That morning, after reading the note, I finally understood that a child can remain your child forever, while still becoming a separate adult. Maybe my mistake was believing separation meant rejection. Maybe his mistake was believing distance required cruelty. Neither of us needed to disappear. We needed space, real space, the kind where love could breathe without one person carrying the entire weight of it. I did not know then that this distinction would become the foundation of everything that followed. I only knew that something inside me had changed. I was no longer willing to confuse guilt with responsibility, sacrifice with love, or silence with peace. The woman sitting at that kitchen table was still a mother, still a widow, still the same Evelyn Harper. But she was beginning, quietly, to become someone else too, someone who could say no and remain kind, someone who could love her son without owning his future, someone who could finally make room for herself, and maybe that was not selfishness. My name is Evelyn Harper. I was 68 years old that morning, a widow for nearly 50 years, and a woman who had spent most of her life believing that love meant making yourself useful. I had spent 31 years working in hospital administration. I raised my son Daniel after his father died when Daniel was 19. I paid his tuition. I helped him move apartments. I sat beside him through heartbreaks, job changes, and every crisis that seemed impossible until the next one arrived. When Daniel called me 7 years before that morning, his voice had been tight with panic. "Mom, Rachel and I have a problem." The problem was their mortgage. They had bought a house they could barely afford, and a rate adjustment had pushed the payment beyond what they could manage. "How far behind are you?" I asked. "Not yet. But you will be." He went quiet. I knew that silence. It was the silence he had used since childhood when he wanted me to offer the solution without asking for it. That evening, I called him back. "You know the guest apartment attached to my house?" "Yeah." "You and Rachel can move into the main house. I'll take the apartment. Save aggressively for a few years, get your finances under control, and then move out." "Mom, you don't have to do that." "I know." "You really mean it?" "I do, but this is temporary." He promised me it would be. Rachel came on the phone crying. She called me generous. She said they would never forget it. For the first few months, I believed every word. They brought laughter into my house. Daniel mowed the lawn. Rachel cooked sometimes. He brought me leftovers in little containers and joked that I was becoming his favorite neighbor. Then the small changes began. Daniel stopped mowing. Rachel started having people over without telling me. Bills grew, and somehow I started paying them. The water heater failed. I replaced it. Daniel's car needed tires. I quietly wrote a check. Every time I told myself the same thing: it's still a bridge. One evening, 14 months into the arrangement, I came home and heard music coming from my apartment. I opened the door and found Rachel inside, using my reading room as if it were part of the main house. My chair had been moved. Robert's photograph had been shifted. A speaker sat plugged into my wall. Rachel looked up and smiled. "Hope you don't mind." I stared at the chair. "This is my apartment." "I know, I was just tidying." She put everything mostly back and left. I sat alone beneath the photograph of my late husband and finally heard the thought I had been refusing to hear. Pay attention. So I did. I began noticing everything. Rachel referred to my house as our place. Daniel stopped saying, "We're getting closer." Instead, he said, "We just need more time." Then one afternoon I walked past the kitchen window and heard Rachel talking to a friend. "She won't need all this space forever," she said. I stopped cold. Her friend laughed. Rachel answered casually, "For now, it works." I went back to my apartment without confronting her. That night, I remembered something my husband had once asked me. "If you take care of everybody, Evelyn, who takes care of you?" I had laughed when he said it. I wasn't laughing anymore. Still, I said nothing. 2 months later, the note appeared. "Mom, stop depending on me." I sat at the table in my old blue robe and realized something uncomfortable. My first feeling wasn't anger, it was shame. I wondered what I had done wrong. That was how deeply I had trained myself to carry other people's emotions. Even when my son told me I was a burden, my instinct was to apologize. Then something colder replaced the shame. Clarity. I changed clothes. I put on my good cardigan. I carried the note into town and walked into my attorney Patricia Mead's office. She read it once. "What do you want to do?" "Everything," I said. She raised an eyebrow. "I want my will reviewed. Every beneficiary, every account, every financial connection to Daniel or Rachel. I want to know exactly what I have tied to their future. We spent nearly 2 hours going through my life on paper. And there it was. Daniel was the primary beneficiary on several accounts. He was named executor. There were arrangements I had forgotten existed. Years of automatic decisions had created a financial structure that told a very different story from what I thought I was doing. I had not simply helped my son. I had built his safety net around my own neck. "I want to change it," I said. Patricia nodded. "Then we'll change it." By noon, the process had begun. Daniel's name was removed from the accounts I had decided to keep under my control. The will was rewritten. He was no longer executor. I did not cut him out because I hated him. I changed everything because I finally understood the difference between love and obligation. I drove home carrying the note in my pocket. That night, I slept better than I had in years. 2 days later, Daniel came to my door. He was angry. "My bank called me." "I know." "Did you change the accounts?" "Yes." "My name was removed." "Yes." "And your will?" "Yes." His face tightened. "You changed your entire estate because of a note?" "No," I said. "I changed it because of 7 years. The note was simply the last sentence." He stared at me. "I didn't mean it like that." "Then you should have said what you meant." He looked down. "I thought if I talked to you, you'd get emotional." I almost smiled. "That's fair. I have done that." He looked surprised. "But you avoided a difficult conversation by writing words that told me I was a burden. You gave me one message, Daniel. I believed you." He sank onto the sofa. For the first time, I told him everything I had been swallowing. I told him about the bills, the furniture, the parties, the way Rachel talked about my home, the years of being treated like a guest in the property I owned. He listened. When I finished, he whispered, "Some of that was wrong." "That's all I needed you to say." He apologized before he left. Not perfectly, not enough to erase anything, but honestly. A week later, Rachel came to my door. She apologized too. Then she asked me why I had never confronted them. "Because I was afraid," I said. "Afraid of us?" "Afraid of losing you." Her face changed. "And now?" "Now I want the truth more than I want comfort." She nodded slowly. It was the first honest conversation we'd ever had. Still, I knew one more decision had to be made: my house. I had lived there for 22 years. Robert had died there. Daniel had grown up there. Every room contained a piece of my history. But for 7 years, I had been living in the guest apartment while my son lived in my home. I didn't want that anymore. I wrote a list in my desk drawer. I want mornings that belong to me. I want a home where nothing moves without my permission. I want to go somewhere new. I want to know who I am when I am not taking care of someone. I want time, just time, mine. And then I wrote one last line. I want to forgive my son, not because he is entitled to it, because I am entitled to peace. 11 days later, I called a real estate agent. Her name was Sandra Cho. She came to the house and walked through every room. Then she looked at me. "Why are you selling?" I told her. She didn't judge me. Instead, she asked, "Are you moving toward something or only away from something?" The question stayed with me. That afternoon, I realized I had spent my entire adult life moving toward somebody else's needs. I wanted, for once, to move toward myself. So I told Sandra to start the process. I planned to list in the spring. I told Daniel and Rachel that Friday. "I'm selling the house." Rachel stared at me. Daniel didn't speak. "You've got 4 months," I continued. "That gives you time to find somewhere else." Daniel looked wounded. "Did you think about talking to us first?" I met his eyes. "Did you think about talking to me before leaving that note?" He looked away. Then he whispered, "You're right." That conversation was different from the others. They weren't asking me to forgive them. I wasn't asking them to understand me. We were simply accepting reality. And then something happened that I hadn't expected. Daniel admitted he was scared. "I don't know if we can do it on our own." "You can," I told him. "You just haven't had to prove it yet." Rachel nodded. I think you're right. They started looking for an apartment. They found one within weeks. Daniel sat down with their finances and discovered something that made him call me. Mom, we're actually okay. You have been okay for years. We just never looked. That broke my heart in a strange way. I had protected him so thoroughly that he had stopped seeing his own strength. So I let go. In December, I received a call from a realtor in Colorado. Sandra had given her my information. There are a few lake properties I think you might like, she said. I had never been to Colorado. I had hardly traveled alone at all. But something in me said yes. I flew out after Christmas. The mountains appeared beneath the airplane window, white and enormous. I pressed my hand against the glass. For the first time in my life, no one in that place knew me. I could become anyone. The third house we visited was small, 2 bedrooms, a fireplace, huge windows overlooking a frozen lake. Afternoon light spilled across the floor. I stood there and felt the tightness in my chest disappear. This was it. Not because it was perfect, because it was mine. I made an offer. It was accepted. I was going to Colorado. When I told Daniel, he was quiet. Then he smiled. That might be good for you. It is. He hesitated. Are you happy? Not yet, I said. But I'm moving, he laughed. That's very you. I'll take that. A few weeks later, Daniel and Rachel moved into their own apartment. On moving day, Daniel came to my door. We're done. We walked outside. The driveway was empty. He looked older somehow, but also stronger. Thank you, he said. For what? For making us learn how to do this. I smiled. You're welcome. Then he hugged me. It was the first real hug he had given me in years. I stood very still and held on to him. Not because I was afraid he would leave, because I knew he would. And that was okay. I left for Colorado in February. The new house was cold when I arrived. The movers were delayed by a mountain storm, so for 2 days I lived there with an air mattress, 1 suitcase, and Robert's photograph. Those 2 days changed me. I woke whenever I wanted. I walked by the lake, I ate when I was hungry, I read, I listened to silence. No one needed anything from me. And for the first time, I discovered that being alone was not the same as being abandoned. I liked my own company. That realization mattered more than the house. When my furniture finally arrived, I arranged everything slowly. Robert's photograph went on a shelf overlooking the lake. That evening, I cooked pasta. I sat at my own table and ate it in my own kitchen. The meal tasted like freedom. March was harder. Loneliness came. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that arrives in the middle of a perfectly ordinary Tuesday. I would reach for my phone to tell Robert something, and remember he was gone. I would cook too much food. I would wake at 3 in the morning and stare at a ceiling that did not yet feel familiar. I called my friend Dolores. It gets better, I said. She laughed gently. It gets realer first. She was right. Freedom did not remove grief. It gave me room to feel it. So I started building a life. I joined a watercolor class. I met a woman named Beth who drank too much coffee and made fun of her own paintings. We became friends. I walked. I explored town. I learned the names of local birds. I discovered that I had opinions about furniture colors, mountain weather, and terrible restaurant service. Tiny things, wonderful things. I began becoming a person again instead of a role. In April, Daniel called. Mom, can I ask about the will? I sat down. What do you want to know? Why did you change it? I told him the truth. It wasn't punishment, it was reclamation. I realized I had written my future around you. Even my death was organized around what you might need. I had never written anything around what I wanted. He was silent. Then he said, I think I understand. Later, he admitted something else. When I wrote that note, I was trying to push you away because I didn't know how to create boundaries. I closed my eyes. That makes sense. But it was wrong. Yes. I'm sorry. The apology was different this time. It carried understanding. I forgive you, I said. Not because everything was erased, because I no longer wanted to carry it. Daniel and Rachel came to Colorado in May. When I opened the door, Rachel hugged me immediately. This place is beautiful. You haven't seen the lake yet. I don't need to. Daniel carried a bottle of wine and a small plant. We kept it alive. I laughed. That may be your greatest achievement. They stayed for several days. We cooked together. We walked around the lake. We talked about everything. One night after dinner, Daniel and I sat alone at the kitchen table. "Mom," he said, "did changing the will feel like letting go of me?" I thought about it. "No," I said. It felt like letting go of the version of myself who believed being needed was the same as being loved. He nodded. "I think I need to learn how to build my own life too." "You do? Without you fixing it?" "Especially without me fixing it." He smiled. "I love you. I love you too." And I knew we meant it in a different way now. Not the old way, the healthier way. Before bed that night, I opened my desk drawer. I found the list. I read every line. I had done them all. I had mornings that belonged to me. I had a home where nothing moved without my permission. I had gone somewhere new. I had sat beside a frozen lake and felt the beauty of it. I had learned who I was when no one needed me. And I had forgiven my son. I folded the list one final time, then I carried it to the kitchen. I held it over the sink and let it fall into the trash. Not because it was meaningless, because it was finished. I stood there for a while, looking out at the dark lake. At 68, I finally understood something I wish I had learned at 30. Love is not supposed to require you to disappear. Helping someone is not the same as becoming responsible for their entire life. And setting a boundary is not abandonment. Sometimes it is the only thing that gives love a chance to survive. Daniel's note hurt me. There is no rewriting that. But the note did something else. It showed me a truth I'd been avoiding. It showed me that I had built a life where everyone knew exactly what they could receive from me, while I had forgotten to ask what I wanted to receive from life itself. So I changed it. Not overnight, not perfectly. I changed it one decision at a time. I stopped paying bills that weren't mine. I stopped solving problems before anyone asked. I stopped apologizing for having needs. I stopped treating my son's discomfort as proof that I had done something wrong. And somewhere in all that stopping, I started. I started living. Some mornings, I still miss Daniel. Some evenings, I still miss Robert. Sometimes Colorado still feels impossibly far from the woman I used to be. But when I wake now, I know exactly whose life I'm waking up inside, mine. The house by the lake is quiet in the morning. The light comes across the water. The coffee gets cold if I forget it, and sometimes I do, because I am busy looking out the window. There is no note on my table anymore. No warning, no accusation, no demand, just sunlight, just silence. Just a future I finally allowed myself to own. And I think that is the part I never saw coming. My son thought he was telling me to make my own plans. So I did. I made plans bigger than he imagined. I built a home he could visit but never control. I built a life he could love without carrying. I built a relationship with him that had room for both of us to be adults. Most importantly, I found the woman underneath all those years of sacrifice. She was still there. She had simply been waiting for me to make room for her. And on the first morning, I woke up in that house, at 68 years old, with the lake shining outside my window and nobody asking me for anything. I realized something that brought tears to my eyes. I was not starting over. I was finally starting.